So we still have some light fixtures that aren't up yet, but in the bathroom, all the glass and the cabinets are being installed.
Okay, let's do it.
It's not light.
Good night, son. This thing is a beast.
When Fixer Upper aired its final episode in April 2018, it wasn't going out on low ratings or fading interest. The show was arguably the biggest thing on HGTV, a genuine cultural phenomenon that had turned shiplap and neutral paint colors into a nationwide obsession and made Waco, Texas into an unlikely tourist destination. That's exactly why the ending caught so many fans off guard. Shows don't usually walk away at their peak, and Joanna and Chip Gaines did precisely that, leaving behind a wave of speculation about what was really going on behind the scenes. The truth, once you look past the rumors, turns out to be less about scandal and much more about two people who built an empire, ran out of hours in the day, and made a deliberate choice to protect their family before it was too late to do so. To understand why they walked away, it helps to go back further than the show itself, to who Joanna Gaines was before any of this started. She was born Joanna Stevens in Wichita, Kansas, in 1978, to a Korean mother and a father of Lebanese and German descent. That mixed heritage shaped more than just her appearance, it gave her an early, personal understanding of what it meant to sit between cultures. Her family moved often during her childhood before eventually settling in Texas, and in most of the schools she attended, she was the only Asian American student in her class. She has spoken about feeling like an outsider during those years, and about the discomfort of never quite blending in anywhere she went. Rather than let that experience harden into resentment, she carried it forward as a kind of quiet resilience, one that would later shape both her design philosophy and her approach to building a brand people felt personally connected to. Her first brush with being on camera came at 12 years old, in a commercial for her father's Firestone tire store in Waco. It was a small, unremarkable moment at the time, but it planted an early comfort with being in front of an audience that would matter enormously later on. She went on to study communications at Baylor University, a degree that, on the surface, had nothing to do with interior design. In practice, it gave her exactly the skills she would eventually rely on most: the ability to explain an idea clearly, connect with an audience, and tell a story that made people care. Design itself, meanwhile, she largely taught herself. She never trained formally as an interior designer. Instead, she built her eye through trial and error, working small projects, absorbing what worked and what didn't, and slowly developing the clean, warm, farmhouse-inspired style that would eventually become instantly recognizable to millions of viewers. The turning point in her personal and professional life came in 2001, when she met Chip Gaines, a contractor with his own growing business in Waco. Their connection was immediate, built on a shared interest in renovation and a complementary set of skills. They married in 2003, and not long after, opened Magnolia Market, a small storefront in Waco that sold a mix of vintage finds, handmade furniture, and home decor that reflected Joanna's emerging aesthetic. It wasn't a large operation, but it gave her a real space to test her ideas, and it gave the couple their first taste of running a business together, with Chip handling construction and operations while Joanna focused on design and product. Before any of that could happen, though, Joanna spent a few years working in a role that, while not glamorous, ended up shaping her instincts as much as any of her later design work did. After finishing her communications degree at Baylor, she took a job as a buyer for a local retail shop, a position that put her in constant contact with home goods, decor, and the kinds of small stylistic choices that determine whether a space feels put together or thrown together. Working as a buyer also meant learning to read what customers actually responded to versus what simply looked good on paper, a skill and market awareness that would later prove just as valuable as her creative eye once she started running her own store and, eventually, an entire brand. To reach people beyond the shop's four walls, Joanna also started a blog, sharing renovation projects and design tips in a voice that felt approachable rather than polished. That blog turned out to be more consequential than either of them expected. It caught the attention of an HGTV producer, and that connection eventually became the seed of Fixer Upper. The show premiered on HGTV in May 2013 and built its audience quickly. Its format was simple: a family looking to buy a home in Waco would choose between 3 fixer-upper properties, and Chip and Joanna would take the winning house from a rundown shell to a finished, personalized home, all while contending with the kind of hidden problems, budget pressures, and tight deadlines that come with renovating older properties. What set the show apart wasn't just the transformations themselves, though those were often dramatic. It was the chemistry between Joanna and Chip, her design instincts paired with his hands-on construction knowledge and easy humor, and the emotional honesty they brought to the process. Viewers weren't just watching houses get fixed, they were watching a real partnership at work, complete with disagreements, problem-solving, and the kind of genuine, unscripted moments that are hard to manufacture. Joanna's signature style on the show, shiplap walls, open floor plans, neutral palettes, and reclaimed materials, became so widely copied that it effectively defined an entire era of American home design. By the show's 5th season, though, the pace behind the cameras had become genuinely exhausting. Filming a weekly renovation series means working on a tight production schedule, often with multiple projects overlapping at once, while also managing the unpredictable realities of construction, like discovering right behind a wall or a plumbing problem that wasn't in the original budget. Joanna and Chip were doing all of that while also raising 5 children and running Magnolia Market, which by that point had already grown well beyond its original storefront. Chip has said publicly that the demands of the show had started to affect their family life in ways that felt unsustainable, describing a period where the pressure of production made things, in his words, complicated in a way that pushed them toward a decision. Rather than let the show consume everything else they were building, they made the call to end Fixer Upper on their own terms, while it was still popular, rather than waiting for the moment it might start to decline. Importantly, the Gaineses were consistent in saying the decision wasn't the result of a falling out with HGTV or any kind of behind-the-scenes conflict. In a joint statement issued around the show's ending, they described feeling like the day they wrapped their final episode marked the close of a meaningful chapter, one they needed a genuine break from, even as they made clear they weren't finished dreaming up new ways to bring old houses back to life. That framing turned out to be accurate. Ending the television show did not mean stepping away from renovation, design, or the public eye. It meant redirecting their energy towards something with more room to grow, the Magnolia brand itself. It's also worth noting how many competing demands were converging on the couple at once by the time the show wrapped. They weren't simply juggling production schedules and parenting, they were doing so while their retail business was scaling rapidly, while national attention on the farmhouse trend they'd helped popularize was only intensifying, and while imitators across the design and television industries were racing to replicate the format that had made Fixer Upper successful in the first place. Each of those pressures on its own would have been manageable. Stacked together, alongside the responsibility of raising 5 children largely in public view, they created a kind of cumulative strain that isn't always visible to an audience watching a 40-minute episode with a tidy reveal at the end. Ending the show gave the Gaineses room to address all of those pressures at once, rather than trying to manage them piecemeal while still meeting a weekly filming deadline. In the years immediately following Fixer Upper's finale, Joanna focused heavily on expanding Magnolia beyond a single retail location. The most visible result was Magnolia Market at the Silos, a sprawling complex in Waco that combined shopping, dining, a bakery, and event space into one destination, effectively turning what had been a modest storefront into a full-fledged lifestyle experience. She also launched Magnolia Journal, a quarterly print magazine covering design, recipes, and personal storytelling, giving fans outside of Waco a way to stay connected to the brand's aesthetic and values. Joanna became a published author as well, writing books including The Magnolia Story, Magnolia Table, and Homebody, each blending personal narrative with practical design advice. She also entered into brand partnerships, developing a paint line with KILZ and a home decor collection with Anthropology, extending her design sensibility into products available well beyond Waco. Meanwhile, Magnolia Realty gave the brand a foothold in real estate, helping clients find and renovate homes in the same spirit the show had always championed. Running this many ventures at once required a different kind of skill set than hosting a weekly renovation show, and it's here that Joanna's communications background from Baylor arguably mattered more than her design instincts alone ever could have. Building a lifestyle brand across retail, publishing, and hospitality means constantly explaining a vision to new teams, new partners, and new audiences, and doing it in a way that keeps the whole operation feeling like one coherent idea rather than a scattered collection of side projects. That consistency is a big part of why Magnolia Market at the Silos became a genuine tourist destination rather than just another gift shop, and why the brand's various offshoots, the magazine, the cookbooks, the realty arm, all still feel unmistakably like the same aesthetic and voice that first showed up on Fixer Upper. It also meant Joanna stayed deeply hands-on with product development and design decisions even as the company grew well past the size of a business one person could realistically run alone, which by her own account was intentional, since maintaining that level of involvement was part of what kept the brand from losing the authenticity that had made it successful in the first place. None of this happened in a vacuum, and by 2020, the Gaineses had made clear they weren't done with television either, just done with doing it the way they had before. They announced the creation of their own network, developed in partnership with Discovery, which launched in stages starting with preview content on the streaming service Discovery Plus in early 2021 before debuting as a full linear cable channel, a rebrand of Discovery's existing DIY network, on January 5, 2022. The flagship show for that relaunch was Fixer Upper, Welcome Home, which brought Joanna and Chip back into the renovation format that had made them famous, but this time on a network they had built and controlled from the ground up. The distinction mattered. Rather than operating within someone else's programming schedule and creative constraints, they were now setting the terms themselves, choosing which stories to tell and how quickly to tell them. In the years since, that same partnership has continued to expand, including a 10th anniversary continuation of the franchise called Fixer Upper, The Lake House, which aired across both Magnolia Network and HGTV in 2024, a sign of just how far the relationship between the Gaineses and their original network had come back around. Looking at the full arc of what happened, it becomes clear that Joanna Gaines never actually disappeared from public life, and the idea that ending Fixer Upper represented some kind of retreat doesn't really hold up. What she and Chip did was recognize, at a moment when the show was arguably more popular than ever, that continuing to produce it at that pace was going to cost them something they weren't willing to lose: time with their children, control over their own creative direction, and the ability to build something larger than a single television format could contain. Stepping away from HGTV wasn't an ending. It was a deliberate pause that gave them room to build Magnolia into the kind of multi-platform brand few television personalities ever managed to create, one spanning retail, publishing, real estate, and eventually their own network. When they eventually returned to renovation television, they did it on their own terms, with a level of ownership and creative freedom that simply wasn't available to them the first time around. What really happened to Joanna Gaines, in the end, wasn't a mystery driven by hidden conflict or personal crisis. It was a business and family decision made in plain sight, one she and Chip explained clearly at the time even if the explanation didn't satisfy every fan looking for a more dramatic story. She traded a hit television show for the freedom to build something bigger and more lasting, and the years since have shown that trade paid off. Magnolia is now a genuine lifestyle institution built around her design philosophy, and Fixer Upper itself eventually found its way back to television anyway, just with the Gaineses finally in control of how, when, and on what terms it returned. For a woman who grew up feeling like she didn't quite fit anywhere, Joanna Gaines ended up building an entire world that millions of people now recognize instantly as her own.